Imagine sailing through uncharted waters with fog so thick you can barely see your own ship. The wind howls through the sails, and the hull creaks like the ocean itself is trying to swallow you whole. Hearts race, hands grip ropes and sabers, and then, like a nightmare made real, he appears, towering like a mast, wrapped in a cloud of smoke, eyes glowing like embers, and flames bursting from the fuses under his hat, as if hell itself had risen from the deep. It was him, the ghost of the seven seas, Blackbeard. But this devilish figure wasn't born from legend. His real name? Edward Teach, or Thatch as some historians claim. A man of flesh and blood who, with brutal intelligence and a flair for the dramatic, became the ultimate symbol of terror across the oceans. He didn't need to fire a single shot to win a battle. His presence alone was enough. With smoke swirling around his face, dressed in black and armed to the teeth, Blackbeard turned every encounter into a performance of pure dread. He understood something few warriors did. Fear is a weapon far more powerful than any cannon. But what if there was more behind the spectacle? A plan? A code? Maybe Blackbeard wasn't just a killer. Maybe he was a strategist, a rebel against corrupt empires, or even a freedom fighter disguised as a demon. What turned him into this living legend? What was he really after? Power? Gold? Or absolute freedom in a world where ordinary men were crushed by European crowns? Get ready, sailor, because we're about to dive not into myths, but into the darkest and most fascinating secrets of the real-life pirate who struck terror into history itself. Before the fame, before the terror, before the smoke and burning fuses, there was just a man, Edward Teach. Born in Bristol, England, sometime around 1680, Edward grew up amidst the cold winds of Britain's seaborne trade. From a young age, he showed a natural gift for navigation and a restless spirit that refused to settle. While others were content with the safety of the shore, Teach seemed born with his eyes fixed on the horizon, drawn to the unknown. He didn't crave a steady wage or a crisp uniform. He wanted freedom, adventure, and maybe, just maybe, glory. His first real chance came with the War of the Spanish Succession, where he served as a privateer, a government-sanctioned pirate attacking enemy ships on behalf of the British Crown. That's where he learned everything: naval tactics, hand-to-hand combat, lightning-fast strikes. But when the war ended in 1713, privateers were dismissed, left to fend for themselves. Many returned to civilian life. Edward did not. He saw a power vacuum in the Caribbean seas. Merchant ships sailed nearly unprotected. Fortunes drifted across warm waters, and thousands of men, aimless and desperate, hungered for a new purpose. It was in this lawless moment that Edward crossed paths with a French slave ship, La Concorde. After capturing it with boldness and strategy, he transformed it, reinforced the hull, mounted 40 cannons, doubled the crew, and then, like a king claiming his throne, he renamed the ship Queen Anne's Revenge. The name was no coincidence. It was a message to the British Crown. He no longer served kings. He was now the ruler of the sea. This ship wasn't just a weapon, it was a symbol. A floating roar of rebellion, cloaked in black sails. But what made the Queen Anne's Revenge truly terrifying wasn't the firepower. It was what it represented. A floating fortress, a pirate city in miniature, where laws were replaced by fear and respect. Legend says Blackbeard had secret chambers aboard, hidden compartments for treasure, concealed passageways, even holding cells for high-value hostages. His crew, made up of men from every race and background, followed him, not just for the loot, but because of Teach's magnetic command. He could hold them together through the promise of freedom and riches, or the certainty of death. With the Queen Anne's Revenge, Blackbeard seized control of entire trade routes. Captains panicked at the mere sight of his sails on the horizon. Ports shut down at the whisper of his name. And none of it was random. Every move was deliberate. He didn't strike out of impulse, and he struck with precision. He knew when to show up, when to vanish, when to let the rumors do the work for him. Every detail, The smoke, the burning fuses, the braided beard tied with crimson ribbon was part of a masterfully crafted performance, and the stage, the sea itself. But behind every legend, there is a man. What did Edward Teach feel as he stood alone at the bow, staring into the endless blue? Was it pride, fear, guilt, or a strange kind of peace, knowing he had become everything the world had been taught to fear? The Queen Anne's Revenge was more than just a ship. It was the embodiment of a wild, untamed dream, and perhaps the first shadow of his own downfall. Because the higher the black flag flies, the harder the winds that rise to tear it down, and the storm that was coming, sailor, would be unlike anything the seas had ever known. Blackbeard knew how to play with the minds of his enemies like few ever could. He understood that in the lawless waters of the Caribbean, winning a battle didn't always require fire and blood. All it took was fear. And to that end, he became a true architect of terror. While other pirates hid behind cannons and chaos, Edward Teach built his image into something mythic. He didn't want to be seen as a man. He wanted to be seen as a curse. Picture the scene. Overcast skies, a restless sea, and in the distance, a dark silhouette approaching. As the ship revealed itself, black sails billowed in the wind, and there, at the bow, he appeared. With burning fuses tucked beneath his hat and around his face, Blackbeard looked like he was wrapped in a halo of fire. Smoke surrounded his body, blurring his features as if he were rising straight out of the underworld. His beard was thick, braided with red ribbons and smoldering ropes. His eyes, they said, glowed like burning coals, and his laugh was a sound that froze even the hardest of hearts. But all that theater served a very clear purpose: to avoid a fight. And it worked. Countless reports from the time tell of ships surrendering instantly, without firing a single shot, just at the sight of Blackbeard's silhouette on the horizon. He spared his bullets, his men, and his time, because the battle was won long before he arrived. It was as if his reputation sailed ahead of him, sweeping panic across the waves like a storm. The most surprising part? Behind the terrifying image stood a man who often preferred reason over chaos. Blackbeard rarely killed without cause. Above all, he was a shrewd negotiator. He'd meet with captains and officials, demand tribute, promise protection, or threaten destruction if ignored. More than once, he offered safe passage to merchants in exchange for gold or supplies. He positioned himself not just as a threat, but as an inevitable force, one that could be feared but also bargained with. This diplomatic side, however, was often erased by official history. After all, it's easier to paint a villain than to understand a strategist. But records show that Blackbeard kept a network of contacts: governors, traders, even rival pirates. At times, he seemed less like an outlaw and more like an unofficial head of state. He had rules. He made alliances. He knew when to press forward and when to pull back. Fear was his invisible army, and he commanded it with precision. Of course, when he did choose to fight, he fought with brutal force, and in those moments the legend lived up to the name. But violence was the exception, not the rule. His savage attacks were calculated, not driven by bloodlust, but by the need to keep the myth alive. Rather than waste gunpowder on every target, he chose the perfect time to strike him and always left survivors, witnesses who would spread tales of horror across the ports and taverns. It was propaganda, raw, primal, and devastatingly effective. He understood the human mind like a true master of war. He knew fear could freeze entire armies, break chains of command, and force rushed decisions. His presence was so powerful that even decades after his death, sailors still whispered tales of ghost ships, haunted by a figure with burning fuses roaming the seas. It was as if he'd never left, as if, somehow, he'd become eternal. And maybe that was Edward Teach's true goal from the very beginning. Not just to get rich, not just to lead, but to become unforgettable, to create a persona so powerful it could never be erased from the pages of history. And in a way, he succeeded. Today, more than 300 years later, the name Blackbeard still sends a chill down the spine. it still echoes with fear, mystery, and defiance. So, sailor, let me ask you, what if all of this was the greatest trick ever pulled on the high seas? What if that smoke-wrapped man wasn't a demon, but a genius, disguised as legend? You, standing on the deck of a ship in the Caribbean, with black sails creeping over the horizon, would you have the courage to face him? Or would your mind surrender to fear before a single shot was ever fired? Let me know in the comments. Because one thing's for sure, Blackbeard may have vanished into the deep waters of time, but the fear he created, that still sails, silently, between the waves. After months of absolute chaos with Blackbeard ruling the Caribbean like a lord of shadows, the powerful had finally had enough. British governors, pressured by merchants and colonial authorities, could no longer ignore the threat. Ports were shutting down, ships were vanishing, and rumors spread that Blackbeard even had allies among the Crown's own officers. It was unsustainable. So the governor of Virginia, Alexander Spotswood, made a bold decision: to hunt the demon of the seas like a beast, with no mercy, no warning, and no chance for escape. For this near-suicidal mission, Spotswood chose Lieutenant Robert Maynard, a young but determined officer who swore he'd bring back Blackbeard's head as proof of his victory. Maynard knew he wasn't going up against just any pirate. He was facing a living legend. He set sail with 2 small, lightly armed ships and tracked Blackbeard to a hidden cove near Ocracoke, off the coast of what is now North Carolina. There, among the treacherous sandbars and shallow waters, the monster had taken refuge, or perhaps he was lying in wait. In the early hours of November 22nd, 1718, the sky was overcast and the tide unforgiving. Knowing brute force wouldn't be enough, Maynard laid a trap. He hid most of his men below deck, leaving only a handful visible topside, posing as an easy target. Blackbeard took the bait and attacked with fury. His ship closed in, cannons roared, and the first blasts tore through Maynard's hull. But when the pirates boarded, the hidden soldiers emerged, and all hell broke loose. It was hand-to-hand combat. Swords clashing, blood spilling across wet planks, screams cutting through the salt-heavy air. And at the center of it all, like a maddened titan, stood Blackbeard. They say he fought like he couldn't be killed, eyes blazing, beard still smoldering. He was shot once, twice, 3 times, and still he stood. He fought on with a rage that felt almost unholy. A 4th shot, then a 5th. Still, he refused to fall. It was as if death itself hesitated before facing him. It took more than 20 sword wounds, cutting through flesh and bone, before he finally collapsed. But even in death, Blackbeard refused to surrender. According to the accounts, part official report, part sailor's legend, his decapitated body was thrown into the sea and swam around the ship before sinking beneath the waves. A scene so grotesque, so fantastical, it still haunts seafarers' tales to this day. Truth or exaggeration? Who dares to say? One thing is certain: that day marked the end of an era and the birth of a legend. Just as he promised, Maynard returned with Blackbeard's head hanging from the mast of his ship. A warning to every pirate who still dared to defy the crown. But instead of ending the legend, it only made it stronger. The sight of the most feared pirate's head swaying in the wind like a grim trophy didn't kill the fear, it fed it. Blackbeard had lost his life, but gained eternity. Since that day, sailors have sworn they've seen his shadow on foggy nights, in calm waters that suddenly turn wild. They say his soul still drifts through the cove where he fell, and that, if the wind blows from the north, you might hear the faint echo of his laugh. Maybe the man died that day, but the spirit of Blackbeard, forged in fear, smoke, and defiance, never truly left. And what about you? Do you believe a headless body could swim around a ship? Or do you think it's just the madness of men who came face to face with something far beyond their understanding? Tell us what you think in the comments. And remember, some legends are just too powerful to die. Blackbeard's death was only the beginning of his eternity. His name echoed through the centuries like distant thunder, And with every new rumor, every ancient map uncovered, every whisper of buried treasure, the legend only grew stronger. His ship, the infamous Queen Anne's Revenge, was rediscovered centuries later, resting beneath the waters off North Carolina, revealing artifacts cloaked in mud and mystery. It was as if the ocean itself had guarded a piece of his soul, waiting to be found. And with every item brought to light, the myth became more real, more tangible, more alive. Maybe that's what makes Blackbeard so endlessly captivating. He wasn't just a pirate. He was a master of storytelling, an architect of fear, a symbol of raw, untamed freedom. His tale doesn't live only in history books, but in the crackling fire of sailors' camps, in the yellowed corners of forgotten maps, and on the screens of those who, like you, dare to sail into the darkest legends of the seven seas. So, sailor, before you go, remember this. Where there's smoke, there might still be fire. And in the depths of the sea, ghosts never sleep. We'll see you on the next crossing, where cursed legends and forgotten secrets still wait to be uncovered. Until then, keep your eyes on the horizon and beware the fog.